want to thank Nan and Mike for having us all here. This is just really magnificent, and I would like to propose that we have all of our meetings here. This is really nice. Now that I know to come to Rosedale and how to get here, but thank you, Amy. I'm not sure where there's Amy and Carol and Murtis. And just thank you all. I want to thank you all for being my friends because I'm really comfortable. Sometimes I stutter when I get nervous, so y'all forgive me for that. But this is such an amazing group of women. And we all get together and it gets just all warm and fuzzy. And I hope now that the pandemic's over that, we'll all look forward to more meetings. And thank you for letting me speak today about my book. I'd also cannot let this go by. Captain Rudy Ward is here, and he is a legend on the river himself. He has been on the river, working on the river for 48 years? 48 years, and this is a person who has lived on the river. He hasn't watched the river. He has lived and breathed on the river 8 months out of every year. More? Sometimes more or less. I know he's worked over many a time, but so you'll be able to ask him any questions that you may have about the river when we're done. But he is such a great storyteller. He is a towboat pilot captain. He is a part-time, old-time Pentecostal preacher. So you're all in for a real treat there. And I'm sorry Eileen couldn't come. Eileen is his wife. She's been on this journey with him, and another book could be about towboat wives because they have to do without their husbands for so much of the year when they're gone. I come, for those of you who don't know, I come from a river family. Our family has been in the river business for 45 years, 50 years, I don't know. And 50, there we go. I should really just let Steve come up here. I thank Steve so much for coming up here today and being with me on this because he is the river expert. Anytime I had any questions about the river, I could just walk to the next room and say, Steve, what does this mean? And he would explain things to me. And he is just a walking and talking encyclopedia and has been my backbone, not just through this book, but through my entire life. We've been together for a long, long time. The first time I ever went on the river, now, I don't know how many of you have been on the river. We've all looked at the river and we've been across a bridge on a river. But the first time I ever got on the river was our second date. And he called me. We had gone out on a blind date the night before, and I think he brought me in at 2 in the morning, and he said, do you want to make a trip on the river? And I said, yeah. And he said, okay, I'll be back at 7. And I said, okay. And so we got on the boat in Vicksburg, and we went to Natchez. And it was just an eye-opening experience for me because a towboat is a work boat. It is not a pleasure boat. It is a work boat. And I thought it was going to be dirty, and I thought, oh, I've got to wear grungy clothes. It was the cleanest boat I could have eaten off the deck. And we get down to Natchez, and we dock off on the other side of the river. And there was a deckhand on there who was literally a wild Indian. I know I'm supposed to say Native American, but he was a wild Indian. And his name was Wild Charlie. And I've always been little my whole life, and so he thought that would be a great opportunity to take advantage of me. And he grabbed me by my forearms and started swinging me out over the end of the barge, just like, yeah. And I'm 20 years old. I said, this is fun. I like this river business. So we got off the boat at Natchez under the hill, and of course that's fun if you've never been there, and made our way back to Vicksburg. And on that day, needless to say, I fell in love not only with my husband, but I fell in love with the river. And I've been on the river ever since. And I've made many a trip, but not as a pilot. I've been on the river. I don't know the river like they do. Don't pretend to. Because of our relationship in the river industry is the only reason why I was able to do what I did with this book. It is a closed industry. You can't get on the boats. The people are not going to give you an interview, are they, Rudy? They're not going to talk to you. They're just not going to do it. But I've got skin in the game, and so they trusted me. And of course now it's completely different. You have to have a TWIC card, which is a Transportation Workers Identification card, to even get on the boat. With the Coast Guard regulations and whatnot, I have my TWIC card, but I was able to call and say I'm Melody Golding, you know, I'd like to come interview. And of course it wasn't that easy, don't get me wrong, but that's the only reason why doors were open to me on the river. They trusted me. They trusted me because they know that we are a river family. I'd like to start with a few facts about what the book is about and how the genesis of it. This is my third book, as Amy said, and I was talking to my editor at the University Press, and they said, after my first two books, they said, we want you to write another book. And I said, okay, what do you want me to write a book about? And they said, well, we want you to write a book about the river. And I said, okay, what? And they said, well, you decide. You're the one that knows. And I thought, well, let me put some thought into it. So I got home and I got to thinking. I was talking to Steve. And really, the people that know the river are the people who spend their life on the river. And the people who spend their life on the river are the pilots. And the pilots are the captain. Let me explain this. Every captain is a pilot, but every pilot is not a captain. But I interviewed pilots and captains because they're the ones who have given their life and spent all of their time on the river, because I didn't want to interview deckhands and people like that, because they come and go and come and go. And most of the pilots that I interviewed have 40 plus years on the river. It's a chronicle. The book is a chronicle of first-person interviews. This is in their words. I took their interview, I recorded it, and then I transcribed it word for word. So every story that you read is their words exactly. It is word for word what they said. The opportunities that the river gives people is amazing. Not everybody's cut out to go to college. They may want to go to college, but for whatever reason they don't get there. But the career on the river, it offers an opportunity for people to move up in the world. And it's a great opportunity. But the opportunity that you have on the river, and I understand this completely, is the sacrifice of being away from home. It's hard life. It's a great life, but it can be a hard life. And I learned early on in my interviews to take a box of tissues, because we would cry. We would all cry. I would cry because I know what they're going through. I would cry, they would cry, but they were happy that they had this opportunity. And I had one pilot, I called him and I said, I'd like to interview for my book. And he said, I'm not going to give you an interview. And I said, why not? And he said, well, the last time I gave someone an interview, they made me sound stupid. And he said, and that's not who I am, and I don't want to be portrayed like that. And I said, look, you guys and girls are the smartest people I know. I said, if I needed brain surgery, I wouldn't want you working on my brain, but I can tell you I wouldn't want a brain surgeon driving this boat. So just because they didn't go to college or have a formal education, the education out on the river is priceless. You can't just go get that. You've got to earn it through learning it, by being out there. I interviewed over 100 people. Well, over 100. There's 100 in the book, and they are as different as people are different. You would think that everybody has the same story to tell, but they don't. And so they're all very, very different. One thing about the river is the job on the river. It's a very unique place where they live, where they work. Most people go to work and come home, go to work and come home. On the river, you live on the boat and you work on the boat. Oh, there we go. Who is that, Steve? Kirby. That's Kirby. See, there we go. Got some experts here. The pilots in my book are both men and women. They, most of them, not all, most of them come from a long line of mariners. And I remember Randy Scarborough. Do you know him, Captain Rudy? I asked him the same question because I followed the same line of questions for all of my pilots, trying to have some consistency in my book with the stories. And I said, do you come from a family of mariners? He says, well, he said, I do. As a matter of fact, my family owned the Mayflower. Wow. My family owned the Mayflower. Wow. And he brought out his documentation, the Scarborough Line. So you can look it up. All you academics can look it up, the Scarborough Line. So it's true. Some of them come from a very long line of mariners. The pilots in the book don't just work on towboats. They're towboats. They're the steamboats for the passenger boats for the cruise lines. And I have ship pilots and tugboats. So it's all, I tried to be as diverse as possible. One thing that's really important for you to know, when the University Press asked me to write a book about the river, I thought it can't just be the Mississippi River, because it's not just the Mississippi River. It's the western rivers and inland waterways. And I know I'm supposed to have a PowerPoint, but I don't. So this is my map in the book, and it's over 12,000 navigable miles, and it touches more than 38 states. And as you can see, it doesn't go west. Is not navigable for commerce. It is for like rafting and boating and that sort of thing. So these are our western inland waterways. So I thought is a very interesting fact that I learned. I'm still kind of amazed by that. Nothing goes west of Nebraska. You would think that our rivers would be everywhere, but I guess that would have ended the Northwest Passage, right? But anyway, the stories in the book, my first pilot was born in 1917, and my youngest pilot was born in 1987. My early pilots were broke in by early steamboat pilots from the 1880s. And so they go way back. And it's like Captain Rudy had told me. He said, I try to tell these young people about the river and about how to pilot and towboat. And he said, I give them golden nuggets. And that's what these early pilots did. They taught these pilots that were coming up way back when, 100 years ago, how to pilot on the river. And it's just amazing, the stories that they tell. In the book, I have 130 photographs of life on the river, so you can kind of peruse through that if you ever get tired of reading the stories. But in the book, when you start reading it, it is in chronological order, from the oldest to the youngest. So I always thought it was neat to look, see who was as old as me. So I would always go back to the contents and look at that. One thing that a lot of people don't know is that the waterways on these rivers on the Mississippi corridor move billions and billions of dollars of commerce and products throughout the United States. And life as we know it, of course, we get in our car and we drive and we go to the grocery store and we live our life. I'm going to tell you, if the river traffic stopped, life as you know it would stop. The products that are moved up and down this river, it is just phenomenal. And the tonnage that goes up and down this river that is not going on our highways, I mean, it's just, I have that on a PowerPoint too. But anyway, sorry about that. A lot of times pilots reflect on their time away from home, and it's a universal reality for all pilots. I hate her when I'm with her, and I miss her when I'm gone, is how a lot of them feel. When they're on the boat, they hate being on the boat, and all they can think about is being at home. When they're home, all they can think about is being on the boat. Is that not true? Yes. One interesting thing is I went, I didn't sit in my office and do all these interviews. I went all over America to get these interviews. I went from Paducah, Kentucky to to Illinois, to New Orleans, Houston, Baton Rouge, somewhere south of Baton Rouge. I don't even know where it was. I just went all over to get these interviews, and it took me 10 years. It took me 10 years to write this book. It's hard lining up interviews, persuading somebody to give me an interview, and going. I remember one time I had an interview with the pilot on the American Queen, and that's the cruise boat. And I gotten our port captain to call their captain on the boat to see if I could come get an interview, because I wanted to give, not just towboats, but passenger boats and all that. And I said, okay, when can I come? And they told me when to come. So I had all my cameras on my backpack, and I had my tripod, and I had all my equipment, and I had on my life jacket, had on all my stuff. And I get on the boat, and I'm walking down the hall, and this group of little ladies were sitting there having cocktails in the afternoon. And I said, do you know where Captain Max Tabor is? And they said, oh, he's right down there. And I said, okay. And they said, oh, here he comes right now. And I said, where? And they said, he's coming up right now. And I said, where? And they said, that man right there. He was the cutest thing you ever saw. Not at all. No offense, Rudy. No offense, Rudy, but not at all what you would think of a riverboat captain. He's 2 years younger than my oldest son. He was so cute, and those little ladies just started laughing. And I'm not gonna say he was a captain, but he learned to pilot a boat on his daddy's lobster boat in the Gulf of Maine. And his grandfather was a steamboat pilot on Lake George in the Adirondacks. And so my pilots are literally from everywhere. I do want you to know that I donated all the royalties from the sale of the book to the Seamen's Church Institute. It's a nonprofit agency that was founded in 1834. Y'all ever seen the pictures of the Titanic that they have the people are on board or on the banks, not on the banks, on the docks in New York, and they have the blankets? It was the Seamen's Church Institute that took care of the people in that horrific catastrophe. But it serves mariners through pastoral care and education. The river has been really good to us and our family, and I felt like that the royalties of this book should go back to them, and so that's where that goes. Within this book are real river legends. Captain Rudy's one of them. My husband Steve is one of them. He won't tell you this. He gets mad at me when I say this, but he's been a riverboat pilot. He gave up his license when he had to come into the office, which I'm just saying I'm glad he's not gone all the time. But he's a pilot also and knows more about the river than anybody I know. So I'm going to just read a few things, a few quotes. I have to put my glasses on, and then I'm going to turn it over to Captain Rudy. One of my pilots is from New Orleans. She's a nun also, and her name is Joy Manthey. She said, and she's been a pilot on towboats and passenger boats. She said, I started working on the boats when I was 10 years old, popping popcorn on the steamer President. She said, in the 5th grade, I took a test. What do you want to do when you grow up, was the question. And I put, other. And then I wrote in, river pilot. My teacher made me erase it and told me I could be a teacher or a nurse. So that's what really made me start striving to be a captain, because my 5th grade teacher told me that I couldn't do it. She says when she went on a towboat to work as the captain, she said, because I was a nun, the wives of the men who worked on the boat were not threatened. They were okay with me working on the boat because I was a nun. Sister Joy. Because I was a nun, I guess they thought I was just like a refrigerator. That I didn't have any interest in sex or whatever. I don't know what the hell they thought. But I thank God they used me for that. She said that God used her for that. She said they used me as a chaplain, and she was a chaplain on the river for a long time. They call her Sister Mary Captain. She's great. Clark Hawley. He said he's on the passenger boats, the Mississippi Queen, the Delta Queen, and the American Queen. He said, I remember Captain Eddington, Ohio River pilot. He got licensed in 1880. He worked until 1960. And here I was working with this man who had gotten his pilot's license in 1880, and I'm working with him in 1950. So that's how it gets passed along. Lewis Reinhardt started on the river when he was 13 years old. He was born in 1930. He said there was a war going on and crew members were hard to come by. The first trip, the Mississippi froze over at Vicksburg, staying frozen there for 14 days and nights. Every morning about 4 o'clock, I would take 5 gallons of water and put it on the butane stove in the galley and get it hot so I could pour it around the cook's door to get her out of her room so she could cook breakfast. He brought the largest tow down the river at 52 loads. It was grain barges. Larry Ritchie. I come from first generation riverman George Ritchie, who was in the book by Mark Twain, Life on the Mississippi. I am a 5th generation towboater. So all of the Ritchies have been towboat captains. Terry Smiley. Now, Terry Smiley's about my age, and she started out working construction, and she didn't like that too hard. so she went to working on a towboat. She said, in 1984, I went to apply as a cook on a towboat, and they said they didn't hire cooks as young as me. They had to be old, fat, ugly, 1 foot on a banana peel and the other in a bucket. On September 7th, 2000, I hit the deck. Captain Sunshine is my name, and I've had to make my way in a man's world. So those are some of the excerpts from some of the stories in the book. I could just go on and on. But I'll tell y'all one last story. All of my interviews, well, maybe a couple more. All of my interviews in person were so wonderful. When Captain Rudy came, oh my gosh, they had told me, now get ready. It's going to be good. And I was like, okay, glad. So I asked my son to come along, oldest son to come along with me. And we laughed so hard that my ribs hurt for 3 days. It was so funny. And again, other pilots that I interviewed, we would sit there and cry together. But one of my interviews, this guy he knew that he was going to retire and he was going to be going out the door. And he said, he gave me his interview, and at the very end of the interview, he said, I am a company man. He said, I am such a company man, and he actually works for one of our competitors. He works for Blessing Marine. He said, I want to show you what a company man I am. And he started to undo his pants. And I said, no. No, I said, I whatever it is, I don't want to see it. He said, but you got to see it. And I said, no, I don't. And he said, yeah, you do. And he dropped his pants, and there was a big Blessy B insignia tattooed on his rear end. Never knew what I was going to get. But anyway, Captain Rudy, I would like for you to come up now and show, I'm sorry? This is Steve. This is my husband, Steve.
Captured about 80 years of river folklore that would have been lost forever. Right. Would have been lost forever. Right. And probably 15 of these men have already passed on. Right. But I would come home and I'd tell Melody, you ain't gonna believe what so-and-so said today. And she thought, well, this will make a great book. I'll put it together. And I was so proud of her for doing it. And let me tell you, very few people in America could have done it. Because being able to call those companies and say, I'm Melody Golding, I'd like to get on your boat and interview your captain. Well, come on, Melody, because we know those people. Been in this industry all our life, they welcomed her. No other author could have gotten that access. And then being able to get the captain or pilot to open up to her. That would have been a chore for a cold author. But they knew who she was, or they knew our family. And it took a few minutes, but they would warm up. And she always had to have Kleenex, because some of them would think about that cook that sewed my breeches. or I couldn't read and write, and their cook that wrote my letters home to my family for me. Whatever, they would get emotional, she would cry, they would cry. But this was not easy. These boats that she took pictures on, she traveled all over America to get it. These interviews were not easy to find. She traveled all over. We went down a lot of dirt roads looking for so-and-so, and we found them, and thank God we did, because what she has in that book are some of the all-stars, the real characters of the river, the flavor of the river. Some of them are gone, and some of that flavor has left us. But Melody captured it, and I'm so proud of her. It is remarkable that you were able to do it. Thank you.
Well, I couldn't have done it without him. I guess you all know that. So thank you, Steve. But here's a real river legend right here, Captain Rudy.
Well, I don't want to bore y'all this morning. Now, I'm pretty colorful, and to say the least. Done a lot of things, been everywhere, and but the river has been my life. And I'm just a little bit emotional this morning because this is so. The men on the river are a forgotten people. And Melanie and Steve were able, like Steve said, to capture roughly 80 to 100 years. And as you well know, history has to start verbally with a story. And the rivermen had nobody, a lot of them can't write. I taught one guy, we called him Gorgeous George, the love child. He was raised in a honky-tonk on a pool table. Didn't know his mama, didn't know his daddy, didn't know anybody, had some cousin, maybe a little barmaid, and he was raised on that pool table. And we called him Gorgeous George, the love child, because he didn't know nothing. And George couldn't write, and he couldn't read. And he finally found this girl that he really liked, and but he couldn't write her. And we didn't have cell phones. We had no communication. It was zero, none. So you kiss your wife bye, 30 or 40 days later, you show up. And that's just how it was. And so that's the way I live my life. I've been out there 48 years, and I've done everything. I've taught pilot school, navigation, every aspect of the industry. I've done a little all of it. But it was unique with George. Since he couldn't read, one of the old captains, Junior Mathis, he said, George, they were working down in New Orleans. He said, now, George, I want you to take this note out there to the fleet mate, which would be like the boss, and tell him, give him that note, and said, he'll know what we want to do. Well, George said, yes, sir, but he didn't know what the note said. And the note said, I am gay and I would really like to meet you. But he didn't know that. So he goes out and he hands the man the note. And so the guy looks at that note and he looks at it. And so he said, George, he says, well, what does that note say? Because he knew something was wrong, obviously. And so the guy told him, he said, I'll kill him. And so anyway, George, he wanted to be able to write to his girlfriend. Well, he wanted to, he wasn't a Christian. He just wild as four-horned billy goat. And he wanted to, talk stuff. Well, he couldn't write it. So he had to get somebody, and we would write letters for him, or the deckhands would, and but he got tired of that, and so I told him, I said, now, George, I said, I'm not going to mess with you now. I said, but if you want me to, I said, I will teach you to read and write. He said, Kevin, if you do that, I sure would like it. I said, okay. So anyway, I would come to the boat with my kids' little school, first grade, and I taught him, long story short, I taught him how to read. And he hated for his wife to send those letters and then everybody have to read them. And so anyway, that was and there was, like Captain George Reed, I don't know if y'all, I probably never heard, but George was kind of my towboat daddy. He was old, he fought with Patton. He was probably one of the premier pilots that in my book there's ever been. Gutsy. You can ask Howard about George. George was just unbelievable. And, but George could not read his name in boxcar letters. He couldn't write, couldn't read. And he fought for the freedoms that we have in this country and got his hand shot off. All these fingers blowed off. Well, just them two. He'd take these two, he'd say, now, Hoss. And see, a lot of people don't realize that the towing industry was developed mostly by ex-military men, primarily. And so the towboats were run kind of in that aspect. They were super clean and not always real nice looking, but Tide washing powder, Dial soap, and Bo Peep ammonia and Clorox goes a long way. So, you know, there's really no reason to be dirty. Water's free, used to be free. I guess you have to buy it now, but George, he come to the Lord real late in life. And he said, Lord, he said, I want to be able to read that Bible so that I know what them preachers are saying is true. And so George began to try to take, and he taught himself through 8-track tapes of the Bible, and he'd start and he listened, but he was really smart. He was the only man that the big insurers out of Lloyd's of London. He was the only man that Lloyd's of London would insure to carry these big gorilla rigs out of Vicksburg. He never, not with modern technology, had nothing but just an old Raytheon radar, nothing else. And George would take these big monster rigs before the river is way more stable now. Used to, the river was very erratic. It would just go from this side to that side to this side to that side. And so George never had any kind of an accident, ever. All those rigs. And so they wanted to, as I understand it, and I can't verify this, but as I understand it, they wanted to put George in business for himself. And even Mr. Jesse Brent offered George a part of Brent Towing Company. And George told him, he said, Mr. Jesse said, I don't, and this is the dedication. George was dedicated, committed. He said, Mr. Jesse, I don't want to be rich. He said, I just want a job. He said, just give me a job. I don't want the company, I don't want nothing, I just want a job. And so George, he pioneered a lot of things. He was something else. And, but he taught himself to read the Bible. And when he died, and he could read the Bible, just King James Version, and he could read that Bible as good as just anybody. He taught his own self. And so anyway, the river industry is a real closed group of people. People understand they understand trains and planes and boats, and they understand all that. You can sit here, and it's a beautiful river. I've lived my whole life on that river. It's beautiful to me. And it's intriguing, and it pulls and draws. And, but those men out there, you sit here, but you can never know. I've had them ask me, say, well, what do y'all eat on that river? I go, well, what do you eat on the bank? We eat the same thing. We eat big, thick steaks on Saturday. We eat fried chicken on Sunday, seafood on Friday. And whatever, that's the only way I could keep up with what day it was. Because I knew what I was going to see, I like to eat. And so that's why I keep up with. And the other 4 days didn't count. Well, I was looking at 10 years in the penitentiary. I was a bad drug addict. Both my brothers died on drugs. And I myself, I was just a kid, just wandering, living under bridges. My own fault. My mom and daddy, I was not raised poor, but I was rebellious. And so I paved my own road, and it wasn't very good. Because there's always a price to pay. You always pay the price. And so I almost died 2 or 3 times on drugs. And a guy asked me, he said, back in those days, the Greenville, when you come into Greenville, it's called the $1 Million Mile. Greenville, Mississippi was the largest towboat capital of the world. If you could ever crawl into the city limits of Greenville, you could go to work. If you could just get there. You didn't have to have clothes. All you had to have was a weak mind and a strong back. And so, that was where I was at. And so I came into Greenville. I was raised there, but I'd been roaming, hitchhiking, and a friend said, Rudy, do you want to catch a towboat? Yeah, it'd be fine. So I had no food, and I didn't have anywhere to sleep. And I did, and so he told me a little bit about both of them. It sounded real good to me. And so I wound up working for Dr. Wynn, the security barge line, and then the rest of the story, 48 years later, I'm standing there. I have a 1,600-ton inland master's license and raised kids, grandkids, been preaching for 40-something years, and I've done all this. And I'm not plugging my YouTube page, but it might be interesting to you. You can look up Rudy Ward on YouTube. You can see some of the boats and some of the interior and making some of the bridges. And I write songs, and I'm a songwriter. And my daughter's a professional songwriter, and singing and poetry and just stuff that is of an interest to me. And so here I am today. And but the river industry we have a lot to owe to Steve and Melanie, because they didn't have to do this. And Steve, what he said was true. This history is lost. It can never, just since we started this, or she started this, I don't know how many you've lost, Melanie, 15? 15. And one of them was my 32nd cousin, Captain Suitcase Simpson. And so anyway, he was at least 32nd, maybe 64th, I don't know. Way down the line, there's a little blood there somewhere. But Suitcase was an old riverman, and but I didn't come from a river family. I came out of survival. And so the river was my way out. And river was my way of trying to make my way in the world, respectfully. And those guys, they worked hard, and they were dedicated and committed, which is something you do not find very much of. There's no commitment, no dedication, and a lot of them not willing to work real hard. But we worked hard. Washed our clothes in 5-gallon buckets. I've drank the river, bathed in the river. Everything you do with the river, I've swam in it. I've done everything known to man in the river. You know, just, that's all I know is the Mississippi River. And it's been pretty good. It's good to me. And I'm still a functional pilot. I'm getting ready to catch out in, on the 4th. Now, when I done gone too long, man, cause I can't keep up with time.
Share your polecat story.
Well, let me tell them this. This one is better. I'm gonna tell 2 and then I'll quit. I had a cook. I got on the boat in the middle of the night, about 2 o'clock in the morning. And this old girl, she was everything that she described. Probably about 250, 275. And she had on these leotards. The black leotard had them pulled up. It was terrible. You know what I mean? It was terrible. And just, I mean, it wasn't good. And she had no bra, nothing but an old dirty t-shirt on. And so I come downstairs. I've been up all one day, all night working, and I'm ready to go to bed and have breakfast. And so when I walk in, she has these black leotards on, and I look, oh Lord. And she had been in the flour, and she had a white handprint in the front, scratching, and then she had another white handprint right there, scratching. And I was trying to be nice. And she said, Captain, she said, would you like a biscuit? I said, no, baby. I said, I'm not into biscuits. I said, I'm mostly cereal and bacon. And so, I mean, you know, so you never really knew. I mean, we had one cook that blew the turkey up on Thanksgiving Day, and she got fired. I mean, she literally blew the turkey up, blew the door off of the Cindy Brent, blew it. You take an old Tom, and she packed him just as tight as packed him, and then sewed him up with that old black thread, put him in the oven. We was all sitting around at the dock playing dominoes, and something went woo, woo, and the oven door rolled open, and old Tom was sitting there like this, and dressing all over the floor. It was just, and the captain, he said, "That's it." Said, "You down the road." And just so, and then. And I'll just tell you one more. Then, listen, I talk to you all day. I don't know how much time you got. I'm semi-retired, so I got time. But this old girl, you know, sometimes you really think you're doing a good job, and really it's not you. You think you're really doing well, and you just have just a very little bit to do with it. So I had kept the same crew. I hadn't lost a deckhand in 4 or 5 years, which is almost unheard of. I had the same cook, I won't call her name, and everything the same. And the office told me, they said, Captain Rudy said, "We love you." Said, "We never seen nothing like that." Said, "You never have any trouble. You just catch the boat, ride 30 days, go home, come back, don't." Said, "We don't even hardly know you work here." I said, "Well, I'm trying." Well, it wasn't me. So we were up on the upper river going to St. Paul, and my cook had quit. She had a drinking problem. And so we had lost her. And somebody had stolen some letterheads from out of the clinic, medical clinic. And they got the stationery and an envelope, and they wrote a letter, a fake letter. But we didn't know it was fake. So, you know, you didn't have communication. And so the deckhand comes back from the lock. He says, "Captain, I got this letter for you." I said, "Okay." And so I opened it up and I looked at it. It says, if you have had any sexual relationships with Jane, said, report immediately. Said she is HIV positive. I said, oh God. I said, what? And so the deckhand, he turns white. White as that sheet. And he says, now this was before we understood. You know, that was like a death sentence. And, you know, kind of like that boy, for his graduation, they bought him a prostitute. And when he woke up that next morning, on the mirror was welcome to the world of AIDS and lipstick. And he died. A young man, 18 years old. And so, this was during that same time. So to be told that that's like death. That's just like you're going to die. And everybody you slept with is going to die. And everybody they slept with is going to die. That was the perception. And so he said, Captain, I said, yeah. He said, I've had sex with Ruby. I said, what? He said, I have. I said, well, you've been home. Yeah. I said, well, you don't give it to your wife. And who else? Well, he wouldn't say. I said, this is crazy. I said, take that letter downstairs. So he goes downstairs. A few minutes later, here comes the whole crew. All of them. And I said, what? They said, we've had sex with you. I said, what? Now, all of them. I said, all of you? For 5 years. And so, I thought I was doing good. I wasn't doing anything. I just barely keeping it afloat. I never lost anybody. So anyway, the river is, it's really something. And I could just go on.
You got to tell them at the end of the story, though.
Yeah. Did they all die?
About the letter.
Well, I called my office and I said, look, you got to get me off here. They said, why? I said, because I'm not going to ride no boat infested with AIDS. I said, I'm not doing that. They said, well, how? And so they said, just fax us. We did have a fax machine back in those days and thought that was fascinating. And so I faxed them the letter, and Brenda was smart enough, and she was really smart. She was the port captain, Brenda Davis. And she was probably one of the best port captains I have ever worked with. But she was smart enough. She didn't know the industry like the boats, but she understood people and she understood character. And so she was smart enough to surround herself with people she had confidence in and people that she could call and tap into and qualified people. And so she was able to run that thing. And I said, now Brenda, I got to go. She said, why? And I told her. She said, send it to me. She said, this is horrible. I said, we've got an infestation. I said, this is crazy. I said, this thing, you understand compound probability. I said, it is no telling. This thing's probably spread to Florida. I said, I don't even know. I said, we got to do something. And so she did the research and did the tracking. It took a week. Now these guys they done all confessed. See, they all come up and told her everything, told it all, and starting to write the last will and testament, giving away cigarettes and chewing tobacco. And, they're going to die in the next 30 minutes. Well, I didn't know. Yeah, how you know? Back then. And so, we're just afraid. And so she did the groundwork, paperwork, figured it out, called the doctor, He said, I ain't done nothing. And so we finally figured out that it was a fake letter.
Oh.
And so it was all fake, but now they've confessed. See, now they done all told the whole story, done had to call home because you don't know. You can't just keep going. You know, you just, and all them old girlfriends, it was about to be a pandemic. It was horrible. So anyway, we got it all figured out, and
Boot deck.
oh, well, now this is really important. If you don't get anything else on that film, you get this, because this is very important. Captain Hootenanny, which was old, and Hootenanny got that name because they were raised on houseboats, and they were raised dirt below dirt poor. You're talking about nothing. They just lived on an old houseboat, and lived off of the river, a few rabbits on the bank, and such as that. Well, Hootenanny went to work for Jesse Brent, and they went down to New Orleans, and back then the banana boats were coming in, and they bought just whole stalks. They buy a stalk of bananas, and they brought those bananas out. Now this boy has never had fruit. You know, he's not hardly any vegetables, a few turnip greens. But I mean, when you live on a houseboat, you just kind of, you know, he's living on meat, gravy, and they just didn't have nothing. So he sees this stalk of bananas. He's young, probably not 14 or 15 or less. And he goes, woo! He said, nannies. And so from then on, they called him Hootenanny. And so his whole life, and he died an old man, still on the river, died on the boat, and so his name was Hootenanny. Well, Hootenanny told me, he said, now Rudy, he said, don't ever tie your houseboat up in an eddy. Now y'all know what an eddy is. That's where the water circles, goes round and round and round. He said, don't never tie your houseboat up in an eddy. I said, well, why is that, Hootenanny? He said, well, on a houseboat, you drink off of the bow and you poop off the stern. See what I'm saying? Now, if you ever heard of the poop deck, you've heard that terminology. Well, the poop deck is on the back of the ship, so as the ship's sailing, everything else behind you. You don't want to keep that with you. And so when you're living on a houseboat, and this is where you live, and you're drinking off the bow, well, you don't want to be in an eddy where everything, see what I'm saying? And so in your life, if stuff, drama, issues just keep coming up, same old thing. I know it's happened, and the same old thing, same old experience. I'm sorry. I'll leave this with you. I don't know all the words, but I sang it all my life as a kid. And but it says, "Old Man River just keeps on flowing. Old Man River keeps on flowing along." So, thank you, Melody. Thank you, Steve. You do anything, whatever y'all.
Absolutely. If anybody has any questions, go ahead.
And this is for Steve and Melody and you.
Okay.
I'd like to get all your perspectives. In all the years that you studied the river and were involved in the river, and you were involved in the river, what are the biggest changes that you've seen in your industry, and what do you foresee in the industry in the future?
Well, Steve'd be the one to answer that.
I think by far communications. It used to be, as Captain Rudy said, when a person went to the boat, they were gone. They were removed from everything. And occasionally somebody would throw a newspaper at a lock wall or bridge, or somebody would buy fuel or groceries, they'd bring out a newspaper. But you'd go and you would cherish a letter. Getting a letter, even if it was a week old, getting a letter was so special. But now, everybody got instant communication, and they know everything. They know the football scores, they know the wives and the girlfriends and whatever else. They know it all. We have to make our crew bring their cell phone to the pilot house when they begin their 6-hour watch and put it in the pilot house, and then we let them come back and check it twice during the 6-hour watch. Instead of being out there on the deck, being distracted by phone calls and falling overboard, we decided to quarantine them in the pilot house and then let them have access. And if they have to make an emergency call or whatever, no problem. But I'd say communications by far has brought the worlds together somewhat. Because it was truly, truly separated. You were gone from everything. You had to have a strong wife behind you. But when the roof leaked or plumbing went bad, she had to tend to it. You didn't know till you got home. The guy comes home, his baby's grown this much while he's gone. I mean, some of them would ride 40, 50, 60, 90 days at a time. They come home and a lot of things have changed. The seasons changed. Maybe their wife has changed. I mean, it took a really dedicated, strong wife to be married to a riverman. Several of them went through several wives, but the good ones stuck with their man. But I'd say communication by far has been amazing.
And what do you see happening and changing in the industry in the future?
The technology on board too is just crazy differential from what it was 30, 40 years ago. The people, the younger generation, I will admit to you, and I hate to say this, they don't have the flavor that Captain Rudy's guys had when he was coming up. They just don't. Because they have all this communication, all this technology, and the pilot house looks like a wraparound console spaceship, where before it was just basic. And if you had a radar and that radar worked 40 years ago, you were uptown.
Right.
Now they got 2 radars and they got all this different coloring features and make it go in and out and get close and long and all these different features now. Technology is just so much advanced, and it has produced a different type of mariner. From, not to say anything detrimental about them, because there's some very talented, great workers, and they still sacrifice time away from their family. They earn it, but it's a different group, and I think you would agree with that. Yeah.
I want to comment on something. Watching this river, I've seen barges 9,000 to 10,000 horsepower coming up and down. 7 barges wide, 6 wide, and 7 long. 42 barges in one coast. I don't even think any of y'all realize we loaded barges in our business. That's what I was in. And on each barge, you would have 50 to 60,000 bushels of grain at 60 pounds a bushel, or 1,500 to 2,000 tons of fertilizer. And we would book our freight at our elevator 5 miles south of here, full of soybeans, corn going to New York. Everything went to Nova, it was all exported. And we could send a bushel of soybeans in the 80s on grain barge, 8 cents a bushel to New York. The truck would charge you $2 a bushel per mile. That's the significance of the volume of freight up and down that river. It overwhelms you, really does.
It's much, much safer now than it used to be. Nanny who Captain Moody was talking about, he grew up on that boat, and they would chain the kids to the barge at a certain length, so if they fell off, they wouldn't go in the water. Well, that would never happen now. I mean, but it's completely, like if you're on a boat and you're going northbound, and you don't like your boat, the other boat's coming southbound. Of course, this was years and years ago. They can hide boats. You can't do that now. You can't do that now. And not only that, but Steve has on his phone, he can sit there right this second and pull up every boat and tell where they are on the river. Back
How fast?
how fast they're going, where they're going. Used to, boats could cheat and be cut through. They could be cut throughs where they shouldn't be going, but they'd be going to make faster time because fast is money. If they're fast,
Right.
they make money. And can't do that anymore. They're all eyes on these boats. And like I said, Steve's got it on his phone. Everybody involved in the river they know where the boats are, where they're going, when they're going to be there, when they left. It was back then when you started, or way before you started. It was the Wild West. I mean, it was the Wild West.
Right.
It was
Wow.
Wow.
Congratulations.
I mean, one captain told me about how he got on boat every time with a laugh and half in each boot.
What?
Half pint. He called it a laugh and half. So I mean, it's the stories nowadays. When you read in the book, when you get further along in the book, they're not near as colorful as the stories in the first. But it's because of rules and regulations. But I don't know what you want to ask.
Here's a question.
Go ahead.
Okay, so when you're taking a big tow down the river, like we just saw one and what you're talking about, and storms come up, or there are tornado warnings, or a major weather event, what do? You just, it looks to me you can't stop on the dime and
You
you
just
take.
keep right on going. You can't just stop.
You can't just stop and tow.
No, it's impossible. Like I ride big boats, 10,500 horsepower, 40, 50 barges.
And those are the big boats.
Yeah, the big boats, and even the small boats, you just can't stop. And so you just have to, that's where you get the money. Your skill level and your piloting level. And, I've made every bridge on this river and shut out fire. Every bridge, the big tow. Never see the tow leave New Orleans, shut out fire, and finally get to see it when you get up to Cairo, start breaking up. 4 and 5, 6 days at a time, you never see nothing. You're just like
So if
looking
you're
at that
in
white
fog
sheet.
or weather, what about how do you take care of the safety of your people? Like if there's heavy fog, you don't let them get out on the
I
river?
just stay on the boat.
Okay.
The boat sinks, we all die. If you die, you
You said that's in the beginning of your talk. You said that when you first started on the river, it was different. That you would kind of go back and forth, and now it's not that way anymore. And I wonder, is that a Corps of Engineers thing or what?
Well, the Corps Engineers has done just a fabulous job. Fabulous job. Now, people want to find fault with the Corps Engineers, but it's because of ignorance. I'm not being ugly, but it's just, they just don't have any idea the significance and the contribution that the Corps Engineers has made to the navigation on the river with the dikes and just strategies and learning how the river flows and keep the channels open. And because used to it was just horrible, and just you just couldn't even imagine. You would have to see it to imagine what the river was like before the Corps Engineers was able to. Now the river does what it wants to do. The Corps Engineer is not the godfather of the river. They just help.
Right.
But now the Mississippi River does what it wants to. It'll jump that levee. It'll just, just kind of like the 27 flood. I don't know if you knew Captain Herman Caluette. Did you know Herman? Okay, Herman was the man that come down to Middleton River Bar, 80 Mounds crevasse, and he went through the crevasse, Captain Herman did, on a small boat, went through the crevasse out into the delta with a little boat and a little small barge, and rescued people for days, and pulling them off of the top of houses and trying to get them to higher ground. And I knew Captain Herman. He was a great friend of mine.
Just during the 1927 flood.
Yes, 27 flood, and like Captain George Reed was raised here in Rosedale. Give you a little Rosedale hit. Rosedale was the capital of the United States in freshwater river exports. Rosedale. Thousands and thousands and thousands of tons of catfish and buffalo and river fish shipped right out of Rosedale with Captain George Reed's daddy on the ice house. He said, Rudy, we were rich people. And then he said, we went to bed rich and we woke up poor when the Depression hit. And the day after the Depression, all you had was what was in your pocket. For real, that sounds like a story, but that's real. And so they went from being rich to being poor. So, you don't always get to stay where you're at. It might look like things is just going to just roll right on along, but it does not necessarily mean that's how it's going to be.
That's got all the Perry Martin whiskey they carried out here.
Watch.
I'm wondering the scariest thing that ever happened to you.
How much time you got?
Pick your favorite.
Well, I had an old man who worked for ACBL barge line, and he came over to work with us on one of the 5600s, 25 barges, and the river was super, super high. And the old man told me, he said, I can float through the Vicksburg Bridge. I said, well, that's good. I said, and I knew it could be done because I had heard the stories that Captain Jackie Walker, he did this with Captain Carl. He said, when you write, Carl, it'll just go through there. And he lined it up over a mile above the bridge like he wanted it, took the old United States, knocked it out of gear, and floated 30 barges and never touched the sticks and never give it any gas and floated down through that bridge. So he had knowledge. So I knew it could be done. So I'd never seen it done with myself. So I didn't know this old man. I said, can you do that? He said, oh yeah, son, like I was son. Okay, Pop, have at it. And it was on his watch. He wasn't working on my watch. It was kind of watch change. He was going to make the bridge anyway. When he hits the bridge. And he wouldn't do what I said. And when I saw it was going sour, I told him, I said, oh man, I said, you better, and I started coaching him. But he wouldn't listen. Now see, when you don't listen, and somebody's trying to tell you, it's just like down in New Orleans when they knocked the bridge out many years ago, and they were running off into the water. And the man stood on the interstate screaming, stop, 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 stop. And they wouldn't stop, and they was running off and killing themselves, just like that, one after another. And he finally got them stopped. Well, it's the same thing when you just won't stop. And somebody's telling you what to do. Well, they where was that? And I got lost.
You were going down the river.
Yeah, and so anyway, this old man, thank you, Melanie. So I'm married. Now I had one of the good women. I've been married 44 years, and so I kind of have to call them Eileen, Melanie. Tell me where I'm at, baby. I just I know the river. I got the river, but some of this I have lapsed. But anyway, the old man would not listen, and he went down there and hit the bridge. We had 25 barges, and they splattered just like taking a hand of gravel, throwing it out there. We sunk barges, about 5 or 6 barges, and it looked like the boat was going to sink. And I had one face wire left, and it was dragging me sideways, and I couldn't get away from it. It just looked like it was the end. And so I had my life jacket on, and I went out on the wing, and I was standing there, and that Mississippi River was raging. And I said, Jesus, I said, I really don't care if we sink all these barges. I said, we don't want to kill anybody. I said, please help us, please help us. And I give it just a few seconds, I was getting ready to jump in the river. Now when your next option is jump in the Mississippi River with barges splattered, and it was horrible. And so I said, and I done put one foot up on the handrail, and all of a sudden, and I give Jesus the credit, it righted and come square with the current. And as soon as it did, I run in there and knocked the old man out of the way, and backed it down hard, and broke the face wire, and got away from it. And anyway, and then it went on for about 5 days trying to get it all put back together. So, but that's just one of lots. Now, when you got a lot of time, I'll be glad to, because I tell you a lot more. Okay.